Man, this series is weird. There's no deserts, there's no Wile E. Coyotes, and yet the Roadrunner always gets it. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima, and I'm gonna rant to you for a bit about Higurashi no Naku Koro ni, also known as Higurashi When They Cry, which is a mystery. Ugh! I always forget about those sprites. Oh, we'll get to that, we will get to that. So, for those of you who don't know, Higurashi is a series of visual novels. It is a series of 8 visual novels that go from slice of life antics, as they all do, all the good ones do. And in this case, it just falls down into murder mystery, bit of horror going on here and there, and just general crazy crap going on in the background. And it's good. It's actually really good. That's why I'm here talking about it. I've been meaning to pick this up and play it for a while, but man, they don't make it easy. So there's a few weird things going on with this. I was actually going to pick up the Vita version. Well, I would have picked up the Vita version of this, because there's like 2 versions of it, and neither of them work. You have no idea. I originally picked this up and started playing this on PC, and then I heard that there was a port on the Vita. And I was up to about chapter 5 at this point. So I went and looked at the homebrew port, and as it turns out, the way that the guy made it requires his own sort of special setup files that you need to use in order to make it work, and he's only done up to chapter 5. Fantastic. There was also a port of it to the Vita in Japan, and funnily enough, the company that made it actually closed down the same year that they put it out. Oh, it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. And that isn't even getting started on the amount of other ridiculous amount of content that there is related to this series. You've got all sorts of different extra chapters that are going on. There's tons of console ports that have different chapters equipped to them. The consoles have a bunch of different things going for them, like better sprites, voice acting, better background art, and it all sorta comes together in the form of the 07th mod. This mod is ridiculous. Like, this is legitimately one of the most in-depth mods that I've ever seen in my life. So, they take the Steam versions that I've been playing, and they basically overhaul them completely. Like, you can see what it looks like without the patch going on here, right? It's just flat text going down the screen, filling up the screen, the sprites in the background, and the 4:3 aspect ratio. The console version changes this, the 07th mod, also called the console version because it basically brings over all the stuff from the console version, changes this completely. It's ridiculous. It doesn't replace the sprites, but it lets you swap between all 3 of them. This version lets you swap between 2 different sets of sprites. The normal version, I should say. Where it's the one that Ryukishi 07 himself, the author, did, which are absolutely horrifying, and I can't look at them for longer than 2 minutes without either feeling afraid or bursting into laughter. And the sprites that were made for this, which is technically the remake, and they're not bad, but the console sprites are honestly better. They feel like they're more down to earth, more properly drawn, and the funny thing is they've actually got lip syncing too, because they added that in the console versions, which they ported over to this version, which is, again, ridiculous. But yeah, they also replaced the background art, they have extra CGs that don't show up in the regular unpatched version, and they even go to the effort of changing the code inside the engine so that there's a bunch of things that they can do. They add extra, like, paths from the console versions, which all suck, by the way, don't bother with them. They add, like, a more traditional visual novel style where everything's displayed down in the bottom of the screen. They might even fix a few typos and stuff along the way. It's legitimately ridiculous how much effort goes into this patch, and outside of extracting and just running the patch for each individual chapter of the game, it works almost flawlessly. It's incredibly impressive, and I was so depressed when I had to play Chapter 8 without the patch, because it isn't actually out for Chapter 8 yet, despite the fact that Chapter 8's been out for a couple of months at this point. I understand why, considering how much of a change Chapter 8 is in comparison to everything else. I'm still disappointed, though. I would recommend waiting for Chapter 8 to get the patch before you decide to go all the way through this series. But anyway, let's stop talking about irrelevant crap and talk about the actual story now. So, the story is that it is 1983 in a neat little off-the-grid village in Japan known as Hinamizawa. and you are at least in the beginning, you are a fresh move to the town. You just got there. You're just integrating with the school. You're just integrating with country life. And then weird shit starts going down. Now, I'm going to spoil what happens in the first chapter, I should say, out of 8, because the first chapter is actually free right now on Steam, and you should actually go play it. Like, there's no reason for you not to go and do that right now. It's legitimately 100% free. It is like 3 to 4 hours if you're playing it normally, but if you have the voice acting alongside it, it stretches out to 11. That's how long it took me with the patch, because it is ridiculous, as I said before. But yes, basically, things start getting weird. People start looking like they're possessed and talking to you about some of the weirdest stuff. And things happen that make you a bit more paranoid about what's going on. And then eventually, some of your friends try to kill you, and you end up killing them back. And that's just the first chapter. They seed a lot of little bits of mystery here and there. They tell you not very much about what's going on. They definitely have a good tendency to seed elements of the mystery and then take a while to solve them. In fact, the entire setup of the plot, of the way the chapters are handled, is actually unusual. So the way it works is the first 4 chapters, they call them arcs, but I'm going to call them chapters because they also call them chapters. But yes, the first 4 chapters are what they call the question arcs, and basically you get absolutely no answers as to what's going on until you get through those question arcs, and admittedly, that's the best part of the story. Now, I'm not going to say it's the best by a long shot, but there are some things they do in the answer arcs that I don't particularly agree with, but I don't want to get onto them until I put up a spoiler warning. But yes, basically, you've got 4 arcs which go for about, like, I started going through relatively quickly once I got through chapter 1 and realized it was 11 hours, because good lord, if every single chapter had that length, and spoiler alert, they all do, if every single chapter had that length, it would easily take like 100 hours at a relaxed pace if you have the voice acting patches installed, because good lord is it long. But yes, the first 4 chapters, nothing but raising questions. The second 4 chapters, they call them the answer arcs, and they actually still introduce like mystery elements as they go along, but they do tend to explain them a hell of a lot quicker. So it's not something that they can't keep you engaged with until the very end, but at the same time, yeah, you will start to feel like the absolute majority of the questions that you could have answered in like the first, like, say 6 chapters, and then chapter 7 and chapter 8 are basically just wrapping it up. There are some like little extra holes that get filled in, but frankly, I'd gone to the point where I'd been able to basically take apart the hints they'd given me up to that point. And I was like, oh, so this is where they reveal so-and-so did X and Y happened because of Z, you know? There's a point where it starts to become obvious, at least if you're me. I don't know if anyone who is particularly dim might completely miss all the hints that they get, but they do explain to you basically everything that happens towards the end of the story. I wasn't left with too many questions until the weird epilogue, but again, we'll get to that once I decide it's time to start digging into spoilers. As for the characters, I like all of them, like, for the most part. There's a few that I don't like, but I don't like them in the sense that I despise them because they are bad people, not bad characters as in their writing. I actually do enjoy the absolute majority of the characters and their interactions, but of course it does do that visual novel thing where they tend to load the slice of life stuff on at the beginning. Now, I'm not going to say that this is a bad thing, but you might get a little bit tired of it because they tend to repeat it over the course of the first 3 chapters. What I mean by this is, you know how in Steins Gate where there is a long-ass intro of Slice of Life before things get really going in the second half? This series does that like 3 times. 3, maybe 4 if you count the really short intro. But basically, you're going to have to deal with the fact that they're going to be coming back to Slice of Life and then coming back to the main plot. And some people might get frustrated with that. I can understand that. I was starting to become a little bit annoyed by it, but you just you do get there eventually. You do get there a lot quicker than you would expect to see in something like Steins Gate. You will be into, like, what's going on, who's going nuts, who's the one who's going to turn into the killer. Yeah, you get all of that information a fair bit quicker. It just gets reset over and over for reasons which, again, I don't really want to go into because spoilers. But yes, I do appreciate all the characters, though. I especially like Satoko. I don't know why. She is absolutely best girl in this game. She is unbelievably adorable. What's that line from Brooklyn Nine-Nine? I've only known this girl for a couple of hours, but if anything were to happen to her, I'd kill everyone in this room and then myself. Yes, because she is just that adorable. Everyone is adorable in their own way, which is a nice touch. They're usually, like, when you watch something like a relatively low quality kind of moe, they're all cute in the same way. None of them has any massive, like, potential character differences. These guys do. They all have their own stories, they all have their own backgrounds, and of course, again, can't get into it because spoilers, but everybody basically gets their own sort of... Everybody gets their own character arcs, everybody gets the opportunity to explain who they are and why they did what they did, and there's nothing that particularly stands out about them. With that said, though, there are a couple of things that I'm not a fan of with certain character developments. Now, I'm going to try and talk about this in a way that doesn't spoil anything, but the game has this kind of annoying tendency to do a sort of whiplash where characters are shown being absolutely nuts, and then it kind of gets redeemed really, really quickly, and then you just kind of expected to deal with this whiplash. There are two characters in particular who this happens to, and just to be non-specific, I'll say the protagonist of Chapter 5 and then the protagonist of the prologue of Chapter 8. You know who I'm talking about if you've already played this series. But, yes, these two characters in particular go so far off the rails that their characters are kind of hard to like. And then you immediately get the whiplash back as you move on to the next section of the story and their justification is laid out. There isn't another character in this series that this happens to. It's just these two. I don't know why these two in particular are particularly rough about it, but you just end up not being able to like them as much, because previously, you've seen all the characters, you've seen how they act normally, you've come to like them pretty reasonably, right? And to be fair, this does happen with the main character of Chapter 5 as well, because they do turn up in the previous chapters, and you do get to know them a bit better. But, with that said, they do just kinda, like, drop craziness on you, then drop, like, craziness justifier on you, and when they don't do that with the other characters, it feels just a bit weird. Especially when the character in Chapter 5, specifically, comes off as so unbelievably self-centered, like, even in comparison to the other characters who have been, who have gone into this, like, kind of depressive, manic, general craziness. Since every character tends to go through that, well, most of them anyway, but again, spoiler territory. Considering that most of them tend to go through that after they've already been established as a generally good person, with this character in particular, the Chapter 5 character, it's a little bit bizarre just having it happen that quickly, Just having the craziness happen before the general justification of them being a good person. You don't get to see that much of that character. The character in Chapter 8 is actually a bit more justified, but again, I can't say why because spoilers. It's just this one character in Chapter 5 in general, which is like, why would you do it that way when you did it the complete opposite for every other character and it worked way better there? But yeah, again, spoilers. As for the other characters, though, they do get their own character arcs, they get their own backstories, and they are entirely not only reasonable, but completely likable and almost justifiable. Because there are, there's even one character where it's like, you see the crazy. You don't see the crazy at first, but then you see the crazy. And then you see then you see even more crazy. Then you see crazy and murderous. And it's like, I've already learned about this character's backstory, so this is actually entirely justifiable. So, it's weird. I don't know why the one character from Chapter 5 just kind of suffers under this, but I know I'm ranting on it a bit more than I really should, but I'm just saying that's what I think. It's just a bit weird. This one character has to suffer while every other character got it just fine. But the other characters, including the main cast, are all really enjoyable characters. They are fun. They react to each other in relatively realistic ways once you get to know them. They don't go particularly off character, except for reasons which are justified by the plot. And the art is actually really well done for the console versions. As I said, the sprites for the remake aren't that bad, but the console specifically just do them really well. And what also does them really well is the voice acting, because again, you don't get that with the remakes. That's what the 07 mod is meant to do. And they picked some really good voice actors. Like, some of them are actually recognized, which is weird because I never recognized them. But it's really strange how I didn't recognize bloody Mr. Takeru Shirogane himself of Muv-Luv fame as the main protagonist of this game. It took me ages to realize that connection, but yeah, all of the characters are extremely well done. When they have to let off the leash and go absolutely insane, they do it in just the right amount of insanity. They don't push it too far. They don't go like too simple with it. There's this one particular rant at the end of Chapter 7 to make this one particular character look really, really crazy, and they do a really good job with that. But there's this one scene in particular which really solidified the performances for me. And there's this one character, it's Satoko, I'll be honest with you, it's Satoko, who goes through a lot of shit in her life, and let me just put it this way. Either the voice actor was getting the absolute shit beat out of her in the voice recording studio, or she's either watched or been through a series of child abuse situations, because holy shit, the voice acting in this particular situation that I'm talking about, which again I'm trying to avoid spoiling because spoilers, is just so ridiculously like piercing in its portrayal that I felt so bad for that girl. There's again, I don't want to say anything because spoilers, but at the same time, I would have come to the same conclusion that the protagonist did a hell of a lot faster. I would have been there, like, way quicker than anyone else. And to be fair, I was kind of justified considering the plot. So the way that the game works is that it's not actually very decision-laden. It is a straight-up visual novel. It is a straight-up visual novel. It's a straight-up, they have a term for it, but I'd be lying if kinetic, that's it, kinetic novel, where you're not supposed to have, like, choices at all in the original versions. They actually added choices to the first few chapters, but not only do they all not have a particularly satisfying ending to them, I mean, they're meant to be bad ends, so it makes sense, but not only do the choices don't make any sense either. They're very, very specific. You have to be paying extreme attention to what the text is saying beforehand. But even then, it's like the thing about the alternate endings is that they don't actually make sense plot-wise. It's weird. It's really weird. I don't know what the deal is. Like, they leave more holes in the plot than they do fill in holes. It's a bit strange. But anyway, for the most part, the kinetic novels. You just sit there and you read, and you don't make any decisions. Right up until Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is really freaking weird. Again, it's justified by story reasons, but it's like the only time in the game where they ask you to actually, like, do things. They actually ask you to, like, make choices in the actual real plot, and it's a bit weird how they go about it, where they basically have you reassemble the story in, linear order, and you really have to be paying attention on this one, because if you aren't paying attention to how the story goes down and how some events play out in certain places, it's a bit strange, because you'll be reading events and it'll be like, oh, am I supposed to, you'll be reading events and it'll be like, I'm not entirely sure what I'm supposed to pick next. Oh, is this the time where XYZ happened? Oh, right. That explains the choice I need to make there. Okay, that makes enough sense. So yeah, you need to be a little bit wary of that. It's a bit odd. But still, it works in the grand scheme of things. And it's honestly not that hard to brute force at the end of the day, especially if you're save scumming like I did. You just... You can... If you're paying attention to the story, which to be fair, I was, there are just some really specific things that you need to know exactly where they lie on the timeline for them to make sense. But, yeah, if you know roughly what's going on, you'll just be able to brute force the few choices that you have, and eventually you'll get there. It's just a bit odd. But yeah, for the most part, there's no choices, there's no gameplay, you just go straight through until that, right up until the very end, which is fine. It's a little bit weird to bring it in right at the end of the story. It makes sense story-wise, it's just a bit odd. With that said, though, there is one other thing you get off to the side, which I actually kind of appreciate, and that's the tips system. They don't actually make that much use of it towards the answer arcs, which is actually a little bit disappointing. Where you get these little extra scenarios off to the side that you can go and watch, but you don't actually have to watch them in order to understand the story, which is a nice touch. Just little extra things that you can just like get for a little bit of extra backstory and nothing else. But it brings me on to the soundtrack, actually, for one particularly weird reason. For the most part, the soundtrack in this game is actually great. From what I've heard, they actually redid a fair few bits of the soundtrack for the Steam releases. And if there's any one in particular, except for the one that I want to talk about, none of them are bad, like in the slightest, right? So you've got tunes that are there just to give you that little slice of life feeling. You got tunes that are there to give you the feeling of this empty town in the middle of summer. You've got tunes that are meant to unsettle you. You've got tunes that are meant to make you wonder what the hell is going on. And they all work for the most part really well. For all of the main tunes that show up throughout the plot, they all set the scene as well as they could. Everything gets repeated after a while because, well, it's a 50-hour minimum thing. You're not going to be able to make 50 hours of soundtrack. But with that said, yeah, you'll be noticing the repeats a bit, but it all works really well in setting the scene how it needs to. Except for one thing in particular. Now, this is a nitpick. I will fully admit that this is a nitpick, right? But here's the thing. The tips screen in particular, which I had to talk about just then, because, you know, these two are related. In the first 4 chapters, and in chapter 8, where you only get one tip at the game, and it's literally at the very end, so it's not like it matters. But in chapters 1 through 4 and then 8, the tips music is perfect. It starts out with this little weird chorus, right, of these singers, and then it goes into this really like mysterious tone, and it makes you wonder what the hell you're about to find out when you're about to read one of these tips, right? I listened to the whole thing all the way through, and it sounded great. It gave you just that little bit of atmosphere that you needed for that screen. And then chapters 5 through 7 change it up. Now, when you're going to read the tips screen, you're going to go straight to the tips, right? You're not going to sit there and listen to the tips music for a full minute every single time. So you'll find yourself just listening to the first like 30 seconds or so at most of the tune. And the first 30 seconds of the tune that they swap out, the chapter 1 through 4 one, 4 chapters 5 through 7, sounds like something out of Shenmue. It's really weird. I can't tell you just how bizarre it sounds to me that it just that it sounds like Shenmue every single time I open it up. Obviously, it's got a bit of a Japanese flavor to it, and the music in certain situations and the background art shows that off quite well. But it legitimately sounds like something they ripped from like an unused track from Shenmue, and it just weirds me out every time I go and look at tips in those chapters, because it feels like I'm about to go walk down a street and just get accosted by a bunch of gangsters or something. It's weird, man. It's really weird. But yeah, for the most part, all of the soundtrack works really well. And I said it before, but I'll say it again, the mysteries. Now, there are a lot of mysteries to be solved in this, and they are constantly keeping you guessing about one thing or another, right? So, one of the main things that they bring up constantly throughout the story is whether or not it's humans doing this or whether it's a higher power doing this. And they do a really good job of keeping that sort of mystery flowing throughout the story. Not only just that, but related to a bunch of other things as well. Like, you've got all sorts of other little mysteries going on, like where XYZ has run off to, who the true identities of certain people are, especially once they start going crazy, you know. All of those sorts of things, all of that stuff. And it does a really good job in keeping all of those going for as long as humanly possible. And by the time you hit Chapter 7, the end of, like, Chapter 7, like, all of the mysteries will be solved up to a point, right? You think you know everything about it. And then they give you, like, Chapter 8, which actually lets you go a bit further into the backstories of everyone involved. And then you feel like all your questions are answered. Then you get the epilogue. And I'm really not a fan of the epilogue. It's about time I start getting into spoilers, because the epilogue feels like it kind of resets everything that was done. Because the epilogue is like, you need to put in a lot of effort to find it. And here's the thing that actually, let's not talk about spoilers just yet. Let's talk about the technical stability of this series. Now, I'm pretty convinced that they actually fix a few bugs along the way with the 07th mod as well, because up to the end of Chapter 7, which was where the last patch was, which was where the patch ends at the moment that I was playing this, the overall stability of the games was absolutely fine. Not a single crash, not a single glitch, no problems like that. There were a couple of things where a couple of, like, sprites of the characters just kind of glitched out from time to time, and you'd see, like, a console sprite and a remake sprite overlaid on top of each other. But at the time, I was swapping back and forth between the sprite types, so I can understand why there was a little bit of a weird thing going on there, right? Then I got to Chapter 8. And Chapter 8 is one of the crashiest pieces of software I've had to review in some time. It crashed on me 8 times. 8 times. So, here's the thing. There was actually a patch available for Chapter 8, which introduced voice acting, right? They would do the voice acting, but everything else was untouched. They wouldn't add the extra art. It wouldn't add the extra, it wouldn't add the 16:9 backgrounds. It wouldn't add the visual novel mode. It was just the regular thing that you saw in the first, like, 10 minutes of this video, but with voice acting at the lines where it counted. But at Chapter 8, I tried installing that patch, and then it would crash every single time before I even got out of the first chapter of that chapter, right? So, I had to go and uninstall the patch, still crashed. So, I uninstalled the entire game, deleted the whole folder, reinstalled the game, and it would let me get past. But I still kept running into random crashes along the way. I also kept running into weird... one of the most common things in Chapter 8 about, like, it's just general localization quality is that there was a lot of missing words. There weren't many typos, but there were a lot of words that it felt like someone forgot to include. This happened like a few dozen, not a few dozen, but like half a dozen times. And it was pretty obvious that with these, like, consistent missing words and the consistent crashing, that Chapter 8 feels like it was a bit more rushed than the rest. Especially since I tried twice and the game crashed on me twice when I was trying to get to the epilogue. Like, here's the thing. I finished the game, right? I got to the end, I got the extra, which is like, hey, here's, like, a chat with the author who wants to thank you, who wants to explain why he did what he did for the story. There's a chapter jump, and then there's the segment which lets you go back and find the hidden epilogue segment, right? I tried doing that, and the game crashed on me. I was using a guide, so I was going as fast as humanly possible, and the game crashed. And then when I reloaded the game, it acted like I hadn't even finished it. They didn't even bother to save the fact that I had finished the story before I crashed. So I had to go through the end of the story again, which I did, only for the game to crash again while I was working my way through getting to the epilogue, and it did the exact same thing. So, yeah. It's so weird, because, like, I can kind of understand why it might be rushed, because here's the thing, the original arcs were coming out, like, month after month, Like, I'm just going to look this up on Wikipedia right now, so please don't mind me typing away on my keyboard here. But they were releasing them... Look at me if I can find the dates. Hang on, let me see if I can find them on the Steam page. Where is the bundle? So yeah, you had... they were releasing them like every couple of months. So it was like 14th of November for Chapter 2 on 2015, June 2016 for Chapter 3, October 2016 for Chapter 4, and Chapter 8 only just came out this year. So they slowed down the releases of them massively, to the point where it feels a bit weird that they did. But at the same time, considering that it's weird because Chapters 7 and 8 are like double or maybe even triple the length of all of the chapters before them. So I can kind of understand why they might have felt rushed. But it still took them several months longer between chapters to get them out. And even then, when they released Chapter 8, it was such a buggy mess that I couldn't even get to the epilogue without the entire thing falling apart on me. So it's worth noting that, and I'm willing to make a bet that they know about this over at the 07th mod development team, and they might actually be able to patch the scripts in order to not crash the game. But as I said, wait for the patch. It might actually make things better. Wait for the mod, I should say. It might actually make things better. But yes, should I get on to spoilers now? Yeah, I probably should. I've been at it for half an hour. But for those of you who are tuning out at this point, I absolutely, even with its problems, like some of the characters being, like, the stories being talked about a little bit weirdly, and some of the technical problems that are going on, I still enjoyed this a lot. I really do enjoy the characters. The mystery is gripping, suspenseful, and it will keep you in until the very end with questions. And, well, I mean, yeah, what else do you need for a good story, right? And the 07th mod, of course, is an absolutely wonderful effort, which you should absolutely be using. Even with the mod installed, it was running fine on both my computers, although it's worth noting that if you've got particularly slow storage, there might be problems with that. So, you know, have fun with that. But nevertheless, I do absolutely recommend it. With that said, though, I'd like to talk about some of the things that I didn't enjoy. And the one thing is mainly the epilogue, which kind of makes one of the characters look like a bastard. As to what character, I'm not particularly sure, because they make it look like they put the effort of making things back together. They say in the story that, you know, maybe I should just stop it there. No, you know what, I'm going to stop it there. My complaints about the epilogue are kind of weird, and I might have misinterpreted them anyway, because I actually had to look up the epilogue on the fan-translated version, because I couldn't get the bloody epilogue, so I might have actually gotten the entire thing about the game wrong. So, yeah, you know what, I think we're just going to leave it at that. I did say there were going to be spoilers, but there's not going to be. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, it's great. And as I also said before, Chapter 1 is available for free on Steam right now, and it'll be free until this bloody COVID pandemic goes away. So you have plenty of time to go and get the first chapter for free. And then there's like the... Also, yeah, speaking of spoilers, don't look at the name of the bundle they've got up on Steam that put the first 4 chapters together for like $10. Just don't look at it. Don't even go near it, because it's like, why would you do that? I don't know. It's so bizarre. They could have called it anything else, but they had to call it that. Anyway, yes. Go get episode 1 free on chapter 1 free on Steam. Go get the 07th mod, which is an installer that will allow you to install voice acting, better graphics, better background art, and it changes the entire thing to be more traditional visual novel, but you have the ability to swap back. It even does something a little bit weird that I really should have mentioned earlier, where the console version has actually introduced censorship of some kind, and they actually have like this weird little sliding scale of how much censorship, how much of the console experience do you want with the voice acting versus how much of the censored text do you want that's not actually voice acted. They recommend a level of 2, but you can just turn off all the censorship entirely. Like, man, that is above and beyond, man. It's ridiculous. But yeah, well worth your time. Great characters. Great mystery. good storytelling, amazing work thanks to the amazing presentation thanks to the 07th mod, and well worth the time that you put into it. This has been Blue Maxima, and I'll see you all next time.